Every decade or so for the past century and a half, the proposal for a train line to Doncaster has once again been brought up. A train line proposed for the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, the Doncaster line has yet to come to fruition, despite coming extremely close to being built at various points in time, even notably being included in the 1979 Melways. Let's discuss the Doncaster line and whether it will or should ever be built. The first and only rail service to Doncaster was opened in 1889. Indeed, Doncaster did once have a rail link. A tram line running from Box Hill to Doncaster Hill along what is now Tram Road. It lasted for a mere 7 years, however it closed in 1896. The line was in fact Australia's first electric tram, rather significant in that regard alone. The tram was built largely to promote land sales, a common reason for the development of not just trams but also other railways within Melbourne and around Australia at the time. The tram line was never particularly viable and closed in January 1896. There are no remains of the line, and there's never been any serious proposal to rebuild anything like it. Interestingly, the suburban rail loop is proposed to be built along this very route, some 130 years after the tram originally closed. It therefore may once again be possible to travel by rail from Box Hill to Doncaster sometime in the future. The first major proposal for a rail line to Doncaster was way back in 1882. This would have been a line running roughly northeast from Canterbury Station, with 2 intermediate stations. The line was relatively seriously considered and was used as a marketing tool for prospective property developers along the route, and local landowners supported the project knowing the financial benefit it would bring. While this proposal did not go particularly far, the subject was brought up again later in the decade, this time in the form of a route from Kew to Doncaster with a number of proposed stations. But once again, this proposal languished and eventually fell off the agenda. Throughout the period, numerous other proposals were also put forward. This included lines from Glenferrie and also from Collingwood in 1891. Interestingly, very similar to the 1970s proposal. That proposal continued for some 11 years, before being rejected by the government in 1902, again investigated in 1908 without any success. In 1910, a proposal existed for a line from Box Hill to Doncaster along the old tram right-of-way, as well as some ideas of rail to Warrandyte, neither of which was ever taken particularly seriously. By the 1920s, the Canterbury proposal was fully discarded and there were yet more plans for Doncaster train lines. A proposal from 1925 considered a line from Heidelberg, a project quickly abandoned, while in July 1925 a government report rejected a line from Camberwell to Doncaster via the Outer Circle alignment, but just 3 years later it was back on the agenda. A committee report to Parliament recommended a construction of a line from Kew with a tunnel over a short distance, a station in the northern parts of Kew, continuing northeast to East Kew and with various stations then linking up to Doncaster. However, owing to the Great Depression, the government did not wish to spend any money on railway expansion and the plan was indefinitely postponed. In 1940, the Victorian Railways Ashworth Improvement Plan once again recommended to extend the Kew line from Kew to Doncaster. The line from Melbourne CBD to Hawthorn would be quadruplicated, and the branch line to Kew would then be duplicated as well. A new underground Kew station would be built, after which the line would continue through to Doncaster. There would also be a link provided to the East Kew goods line, the last remaining section of the Outer Circle line outside of the Alamein line. Owing to World War II, the plan was not immediately implemented, and by the time funding was available after the war, the extension to Doncaster was not prioritised. The line came closest to being built in 1969. Although the 1969 Transportation Plan is far more well known for its extensive freeway network expansion proposals, the plan also included a significant expansion to the suburban rail network. Among many other proposals, the plan included a rail line to Doncaster. After 3 years of planning, a route was identified. Beginning at Flinders Street Station, trains would run through the inner northeastern suburbs to Victoria Park. This section of line would be triplicated, and as part of this, several stations would be relocated and Collingwood Station would close. Additionally, there would be significant rebuilding of Victoria Park. The station would be rebuilt with 4 platforms and a grade-separated junction to the Doncaster line. Additionally, for trains between the city and Victoria Park, an underground tunnel would be built between Museum, now Melbourne Central, and Victoria Park Clifton Hill. This would be just a single track, and like the City Loop, would operate unidirectionally based on peak traffic direction. So, towards the city in the morning, and out to the suburbs in the evening. It would also feature an underground station at Fitzroy. This is definitely one of the more peculiar proposals from the time. The only bit of either the triplication, Victoria Park rebuilding, or loop tunnel that got anywhere was some works to prepare for the tunnel at Victoria Park. From Victoria Park, the line would diverge to the Eastern Freeway median. Interestingly, the tunnel that would have been built to allow Doncaster trains to avoid a flat junction, and the subsequent cutting to the Eastern Freeway were both built in the late 1970s, only to be filled in shortly afterward. The line would continue along the Eastern Freeway, and may have had a station at Kew North, near today's Chandler Highway interchange. It would then continue through to a Baldwin North station, near Burke Road, and then Coonung, near Boleyn Road, Thompson Road. From there, the line would have diverged near Marjorie Close, running in a tunnel through to near Williamson's Road at King Street, where a King Street station would have been built. Finally, the line would have continued in tunnels and on ground level through to Blackburn Road, King Street, where the terminus, East Doncaster, would have been built. This proposal was firmly centred in the planning ideology of the time, whereby trains served largely as express services for suburban commuters, with stations near major roads and resplendent in car parking. Ultimately, while some land was reserved and a right-of-way was preserved on the freeway, land east of the freeway was sold in 1984, and the line was never built. This 1969 plan remains the closest that trains have come to running to Doncaster. During the 1990s, the project was once again investigated. The Met Plan 1988 recommended that a study be done into transport options to the Doncaster area. A report was released in July 1991 and investigated a number of options, including freeway expansion, heavy rail to East Doncaster, heavy rail to Shopping Town, a hybrid rail to Shopping Town, light rail to East Doncaster, light rail to Shopping Town, Ringwood line improvements, and tram extensions. The report found that heavy rail would be desirable, but too expensive to consider unless tunnelling costs could be reduced. The report ultimately recommended upgrades to the Ringwood line, like double-decker trains and further triplication towards Ringwood, light rail to Shopping Town, an extension of trams 48 and 72, and it also recommended against an extension of the Eastern Freeway, noting the increased traffic that would result. Quite interestingly, and unsurprisingly, the report was almost entirely ignored. No public transport improvements were ever really made, and by contrast, the Eastern Freeway has been progressively extended out towards Ringwood, Frankston, and then into the Mornington Peninsula Freeway. And the warnings of increased traffic congestion of this report were, of course, true. The most recent serious proposal was in the early 2010s. The Liberal Party under Ted Baillieu won the 2010 election for the first time since 1996. They made numerous promises regarding public transport. The most significant and long-lasting were the establishment of PTV and the release of the Network Development Plan Metropolitan Rail. However, they also pledged to build rail lines like Doncaster, Rowville, and in between Geelong, Ballarat, and Bendigo. Unfortunately, after getting in office, the government decided merely to study construction of the lines, and despite their heavy emphasis on public transport in 2010, the government swung towards the East-West link, especially after Dennis Napthine replaced Baillieu as Premier in 2013. The Doncaster line was once again put on the back burner. In 2016, Daniel Andrews announced that if re-elected, the Labor government would build the North East Link. This would lead to the median strip of the Eastern Freeway being swallowed up by road widening. Instead, a new Doncaster busway would be built for public transport. In April 2023, the Boleyn Park and Ride opened as one of the first parts of this project to open. In theory, the busway can be upgraded to a rail line in future, but it remains to be seen whether this will ever actually happen. With the line having never been built, the question still remains whether its benefits can justify the cost. The line would probably cost some $4 to $6 billion at the very least. If we compare it to the Melbourne Airport line, a very similar new build rail project, which will cost some $8 to $13 billion over a length of 14.5 kilometres, the Doncaster rail line at around 10 kilometres will cost some $5.5 to $9 billion. This is a very significant cost and is unlikely to be balanced by the project benefits. Indeed, basically every previous cost-benefit analysis in recent years for this line have found that the line is not justified on economic means alone. That's not to say that it's entirely impossible for the line to be built because of that. Numerous projects are built without positive cost-benefit ratios, while many cost-benefit ratios for projects seem to be very clearly manipulated to achieve the desired outcomes for the government of the day. Take the Suburban Rail Loop or the Geelong Ballarat Bendigo study from 10 years or so ago. There's also the question of whether we should invest in the Doncaster line ahead of other projects, or even whether the project is feasible at all. Generally, I would suggest that the Doncaster rail line is not that high of a priority in the medium term, and definitely there are other things that could be done in the area, such as extending tram lines, constructing Suburban Rail Loop North, and also constructing Metro Tunnel 2 to allow for the Doncaster rail line to eventually be built. Nevertheless, while Doncaster is quite likely to have a rail link in the form of Suburban Rail Loop sometime in the next little while, I don't suspect that Doncaster is likely to get a direct rail link within at least the next 20 to 30 years. In the long term, I suspect the project will be revisited, and there's always the chance that a government decides to finally build it out of the blue, but who really knows. I'd like to eventually see the line be built, but I don't think it will be built for a long time, if ever. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you haven't already, go watch my video about the Roeville line.